Welcome to special coverage of the first day of the 2024 Republican National Convention on NBC News Now. I am Kristen Welker, live in Milwaukee at an historic moment in America on a truly extraordinary day in politics. This has been frenetic with a lot of developments. You are looking at live pictures from the convention floor where the roll call is ongoing right now. After just moments ago, former President Donald J. Trump officially got the number of delegates needed to become the Republican nominee. And in a post on Truth Social last hour, Mr. Trump announced he has chosen Ohio Senator JD Vance to be his running mate. Senator Vance will soon be formally nominated to become the Republican Party's vice presidential nominee. We will bring you that live when it happens in just a few moments. This opening day of the convention, of course, comes amid the aftermath of Mr. Trump narrowly surviving an assassination attempt this weekend at a campaign rally. The shocking images of a bloody Trump, first raised and surrounded by his protective detail, hanging over this entire convention, and now this entire presidential race. And I believe if we go to the floor, House Speaker Mike Johnson is officially announcing
the chair
Donald J.
announces
Trump
that President Donald J. Trump,
nominee,
having received a majority of the votes entitled to be cast at the convention, has been selected as the Republican Party nominee for President of the United States.
And with that, it is official, and you can feel the excitement, the enthusiasm in the room as we continue to watch these live pictures. I want to tell you about another development today, a stunning legal turn for the former president after a Florida judge threw out the criminal case into former President Trump's mishandling of classified documents. But we do begin with the action happening right here at the convention. This was the scene on the floor just moments ago when Donald Trump officially became the Republican nominee. Take a look.
Madam Secretary and everybody in this great city, on behalf of our entire family and on behalf of the 125 delegates in the unbelievable state of Florida, we hereby nominate every single one of them for the greatest president that's ever lived, and that's Donald J. Trump, hereby declaring him the Republican nominee for President of the United States of America.
There you have the Trump children making it official with the great state of Florida, putting Donald Trump over the top of the delegates needed to officially become his party's nominee. I want to get right to our reporters on the convention floor. Garrett Hake has the very latest from the Trump campaign. Jacob Sobroff is with the delegates in the midst of the roll call vote. And I want to go to Jacob first. Jacob, as I go to you, I might have to interrupt you so we can get to more of the action on the floor, but set the scene where you are right now.
Kristen, we're here in the Ohio delegation. We have no confirmation of this, but generally when there's a scuttlebutt like this, it means someone important is coming. We do know, of course, that former President Trump has selected JD Vance as his running mate, the senator from the state of Ohio. Let me give you a look at what it looks like here right now. Let's turn around and show Kristen what's happening behind us. All these cameras are waiting for someone. Who it is, we know not, but Mike DeWine, actually, as a matter of fact, is right over here. Governor Mike DeWine. Let me see if I can quickly get a word with Governor DeWine. Come on this way, guys. Excuse me. Governor DeWine, are we waiting for JD Vance? Who are we waiting for?
Well, we'll see.
How are you feeling? We'll see. That's not a no. We'll see. How are you feeling about his selection, sir?
Well, great. I'm very happy about it. This is a great day for the state of Ohio. So it's good news. I know JD before I was even governor. So, I'm just very, very pleased.
What do you make of his past criticisms of former President Trump and the fact that they're now coming together? He was a vociferous critic, as you know, of former President Trump.
We've all watched it. They're together. And obviously, President Trump would not have picked him unless he thought he was someone who would carry on and carry out, his vision for the future of the state.
Have you spoken to him since the selection?
No, I'm not.
And we'll see. I mean, we'll see sounds like a maybe. Is it maybe it's coming?
It's a maybe.
Okay. Governor Mike DeWine, thanks a lot. So, Kristen, it's an exciting time. A lot of people down here. And as Mike DeWine said, we'll see. Stay tuned.
Jacob, Governor Mike DeWine calling this great news. The pick of JD Vance to be Donald Trump's running mate, of course, at just 39 years old, as a first-term senator. An extraordinary decision that doubles down on MAGA principles, MAGA ideals, and it seems like the Ohio delegation shares the governor's excitement, Jacob.
We're moving. Kristen, forgive me, they're pushing us away. I'll be right back to you.
All right, Jacob, we will come back to you. While we wait for Jacob, and he's right in the middle of all of the excitement, of course, I want to turn to our guests here on set. Chuck Todd, NBC News chief political analyst, and Mark Short, an NBC News political analyst who knows a little something about vice presidential picks. Mark, I'm going to get to you in a minute. Chuck, let me start with you. Yes. You and I have been trying to figure out who's it going to be for weeks, if not months. It is JD Vance. It's a sign that Donald Trump is doubling down on his MAGA principles. The question is, from an electoral perspective, does this help him? I mean, does it help him win over Nikki Haley voters? Does it help him win over moderates, independents?
This doesn't feel like a political pick to me, or an election or a campaign pick. This feels like a messaging pick, as you put it, or, look, I think it makes a dramatic shift in the direction of the party. Like, if you didn't know where this party is headed, it is a much different party, a protectionist party on trade, a little bit more isolationist, depending on how your point of view on that, but a version of certainly less international expansion when it comes to American national security. Look, I think it's notable it's the first veteran on a ticket since John McCain.
Yeah.
And I think it's notable that he chose a millennial. The generational thing is not, and I think you certainly can see JD Vance as being a very articulate spokesperson outside of the boomers. But this comes with risk, because there's a lot of paper trail on him. He's only been a senator for 2 years. He sort of is a convert to all this, right? He's not even 40. Look, Mark and I are a little bit older. Like, your life, it's funny how your own politics can shift and evolve. He's so new. He was new to the Never Trump movement in 16. Then he was new to the MAGA movement in 18. Here he is. We'll see. I think Democrats, of all the candidates that he could have picked, this is the one they hoped Trump would pick. So that tells you something. They feel like there's a lot of material to work with. And I think just like with Sarah Palin, who's the last time someone with this little electoral experience ended up on a ticket, it's a race to define him nationally, and this is going to be quite the race. Well,
and as you say that, Chuck, the Biden campaign is already saying they are going to paint him as extreme. We should note that our White House team is reporting that the Vice President Kamala Harris, has called JD Vance. She apparently left a message. Mark Short wasn't able to reach him. You obviously are a top aide to former Vice President Mike Pence. You were a part of that process. You remember it well when he was chosen to be Trump's running mate. Talk a little bit about this moment, the significance of it, and what you make of the pick of JD Vance. As Chuck says, it's not without risks.
Well, look, I think it's a very different time in 2024 than it was in 2016. Yes. When we were here in Cleveland, don't forget, the number 2, Ted Cruz, number 2 candidate in the primary, refused to endorse Donald Trump at the convention. And so I think that Mike Pence brought many of the conservatives, the Tea Party conservatives, to the party. I don't think that's the case at this point. To Chuck's point, I think it's less of a political pick, but it's a dramatic shift in where the party is going. It's not just the isolationist foreign policy. It's not just a protectionist trade policy. It's a guy who wants a bigger regulatory state. It's a guy who's applauded Biden's FTC commissioner at a time when most Republicans are are most concerned that many trade deals are getting tied up because of a burdensome regulatory environment. And so it's a very, very populist pick, in no way a traditional conservative pick.
Yeah, I mean, he was right at the center of so much of the debate over whether to send more money to Ukraine. He was absolutely opposed to it, to your point. He really underscores those isolationist
You know, Kristen, he went to
ideals.
the Munich Security Conference.
Yeah.
And advocated basically for less aid for Ukraine. It
Right.
was a dramatic thing for him to do, but it was really uncomfortable for most people at the Munich conference because they're not used to an American or, you know, somebody coming representing the United States sort of advocating for a retreat.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that issue. On so many other issues, Democrats are going to be looking at this pick and have plenty to work with. Let me go to Garrett Haake, who is on the convention floor as well, right in the middle of all of the action. Garrett, where are you? What are the delegates telling you where you are?
Well, Kristen, I'm in the back of the hall right now with New Mexico at the moment. I was talking to delegates as the pick was becoming news, and I heard a lot of welcome to it. You know, I spoke to members of the Idaho delegation. I spoke to some folks in the Michigan delegation, and I think we shouldn't be surprised that the people in this room are very excited about the JD Vance pick. That's the idea. I mean, this is the pick of a confident campaign here who thinks that their strategy is working and they just need somebody who can help them execute it a little better. If you're the Trump campaign trying to reach these, you know, battleground Rust Belt state voters, those young men in particular disaffected from the Democratic Party, JD Vance, the only veteran of the four main players on this ticket, can be your guy. I heard that in Michigan. I heard that in Idaho. And I heard it from Laura Trump, the vice chair of the RNC and the president's daughter-in-law, who really told me that she does see this as almost a laying of hands to Donald Trump, actually picking a successor, something he has not really wanted to do, but identifying somebody who can be the next generation MAGA voice in JD Vance.
I think you're absolutely right. And Kimberly Guilfoyle earlier during an interview with Jacob Soboroff, Garrett, really focused on that point, the importance of the vice presidential pick. Chuck, she was making the case that this pick takes on new significance in the wake of that assassination attempt against former President Trump. Yet another moment in this presidential race that we could not have imagined, and that quite frankly has upended the race once again.
No, and I also think it means more people. I mean, this is both the opportunity and risk.
Yes.
And I say the opportunity, I think there are more people in America wanting to see how Donald Trump's responding, are going to want to say, after given the events, and by the way, his age and Joe Biden's age, where the vice presidential debate will feel a little more significant. But I also want to ratchet things back here. There have been plenty of vice presidential picks that have been negatives on candidates who have won the presidency anyway. Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew, George H.W. Bush and Dan Quayle. So I am not, and some would even would argue that Joe Biden didn't pick the strongest running mate at times. So, you know, I don't, this election isn't going to be decided by the running mates. What these running mates can do, though, is become distractions. To me, they're never net positives for a campaign. They only are either neutral or they are distractions. Yeah. And that's, you just hope it isn't too big of a distraction.
And Trump is someone, Mark Short, who you get the sense he picks a running mate almost begrudgingly. He doesn't really think he needs a running mate in some senses. It does come against, again, the backdrop of this horrific assassination attempt against the former president. We cannot forget that is sort of infusing this entire event. And one of the things I'll be watching for is the tone. Right now, it's obviously incredibly celebratory. They are celebrating the fact that Donald Trump has officially become their party's nominee. But I think in the speeches, it will be fascinating to see. He said he's rewritten his speech to be one of unity.
Right. Well, look, I think that JD Vance, I don't think hurts Trump politically. I accept Chuck's point. I don't know what he really adds to it. But I think this race can be about the top two of the ticket. It gets very polarizing. But he's a rags to riches story. He's a man who served the Marines. He served our country. He's an incredibly articulate spokesman. I do go back to our first point, though. It is a dramatic shift in what the Republican Party believes and stands for. And I think that can't be underscored enough. It's a direct signal that we're headed in a far more populist direction with our policy than the traditional conservatism that this party has stood for so many decades.
Mark, you were saying this to me. You actually think he hired a spokesperson. That's how he almost views JD Vance, as a spokesperson for the movement.
He's incredibly articulate, and he can represent the president's viewpoints. And I think in many ways that is what he saw as the advantage in JD Vance, is somebody who can go out there and be his surrogate.
Almost what Pete Buttigieg, the role Pete Buttigieg plays for Joe Biden.
Well, and we've seen JD Vance. We've seen, quite frankly, all of the vice presidential candidates out on the circuit, running the traps, doing the tough interviews. Garrett, before I let you go, because I know it's very loud where you are, talk a little bit about your understanding of how the horrific assassination attempt against former President Trump might impact, might infuse this convention. As you have reported, he is overhauling his speech, and yet we don't necessarily expect every speech to be changed.
No, that's right, Kristen, and I think we should probably adjust our standards accordingly for what Donald Trump's idea of a speech more about unity will be about. I mean, this is what he said. He said he's basically taken out a speech that he thought was too tough, and now he wants to unite the country. A few hours later, he sent out a Truth Social post about the documents case getting thrown out, in which he used a lot of the same divisive language for which he's become known, talking about hoaxes and witch hunts and Joe Biden-led conspiracies. So his idea of a unifying message can often mean unify around me where I am, as opposed to I'm going to put my arms around you and we're all going to move closer together. So I think we should probably moderate our expectations in that way. And I think just even looking at the speakers tonight, for example, somebody like a Glenn Youngkin offers a very different sense of a unifying figure than does Marjorie Taylor Greene, both of whom on the speaker's card tonight. There's sort of only so much you can move a party that has become so aggressive in sort of its natural posture back towards a kinder, gentler, big tent welcome, which is, I think, what obviously you want your convention to present when you're trying to reach some of those voters who may not have been paying attention until later in the political year.
It's a really fascinating point, Garrett, and it is why we will be parsing every single word that the former president utters when he delivers his speech here on Thursday night. And Garrett, as you were speaking, we learned that former President Trump called JD Vance with the news that he was selecting him as his running mate 20 minutes. Just 20 minutes before announcing it on social media, an indication that they did not want this news to break, and I think an indication of some of the deliberations that were happening behind the scenes inside the Trump campaign about who the running mate should be for former President Trump. Let's go back out to Jacob Soboroff. He is on the convention floor still. Jacob, what do you got?
Kristen, the expectation, although not confirmed, is that JD Vance, largely the expectation is, will emerge from this area here and come down the aisle towards the Ohio delegation. We don't know that for certain, but the amount of activity that we're seeing in this area right now is indicative of a high-profile guest about to enter the convention floor. You can see state troopers here, other security officials, people lined up all around, and there's a lot of anticipation to see former President Trump's pick as his vice presidential running mate. Of course, there's a lot of questions that we all have for JD Vance, but to get people a little peek behind the curtain, they're keeping us very far away from where he would be, relatively speaking. Remember, JD Vance, as I was talking about with Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio, was vociferously opposed to former President Trump, using rhetoric that I think could be called harsh even today. At one point, using language that referenced Adolf Hitler. He's since disavowed those views, and perhaps that's part of the conversation about why he's reconciled with former President Trump. We hope to hear from him about that, what has brought them together. Of course, in the wake of the assassination attempt of former President Trump, he spoke out on social media as well, blaming the Democrats. Will he address any of that tonight? We don't know for sure, but we hope to have an opportunity to catch him as he comes in here in just a little bit.
All right, Jacob Soboroff, thank you so much for your reporting from the convention floor. And with that, this celebratory nature here on the convention floor is happening, as we have been mentioning, at a somber time as well, just 2 days after that assassination attempt on former President Trump. I now want to turn to Tom Winter, who has the very latest on the investigation. Tom, what can you tell us? I know you've got some new information that you've been working on.
That's right, Kristen. It's a 180 from the environment that you're experiencing and the environment that law enforcement is conducting itself right now. We're told that the FBI has been able to access the cell phone of Thomas Crooks. He's the individual that they say shot at President Trump just 2 days ago. And in part of accessing that, they've been examining the contents of the phone. And so far, and this is preliminary, so the investigation's still in its early stages, but so far they've found nothing on that phone that points to a motive, And I think one of the things that folks are having a hard time understanding, and it's understandable, is what is this idea with motive? He fired a gun at the former president of the United States and now Republican nominee. What is there to guess at? This has to be politically motivated. And I think it's important to remind people that over the years, a number of assassination attempts, including the one, the most recent assassination attempt on a president or former president, Ronald Reagan, the shooter there had an effort to try to impress a Hollywood actress. And that was what he said his motive was for doing it. So the FBI certainly wants to get to the bottom of that. They want to try to rule out with absolute certainty that anybody else could have been involved in this. Right now, they don't believe so, but it's still in the early investigative stages. A couple other updates from my colleagues, Jonathan Deanston, Andrew Blankstein, and myself. Apparently, the shooter was able to purchase or had delivered to him a significant amount of ammunition on the day of the shooting and leading up to the shooting. That's what law enforcement's trying to determine. When did the ammunition come in? When was it around? The multiple law enforcement officials also telling us that approximately a dozen guns were found in the home, and they're also looking into whether or not the father of the shooter, upon hearing about the shooting involving Trump, noticed that one of his guns was missing and noticed that his son was missing and may have contacted law enforcement. So those are a couple of new investigative avenues or new developments just over the last hour or so. And again, reporting with myself, my colleagues, Jonathan Deanston, Andrew Blankstein, and we're going to continue to track this throughout the day in the investigation. The FBI out with a statement late today confirming they were able to access the phone and that they've completed their searches of both his car at the scene of the shooting as well as his home, Kristen.
Tom Winter, thank you. And as you and the team have been reporting, of course, the family of the shooter has been cooperating with authorities. Tom Winter, we really appreciate those new developments. And as we continue to wait for who Jacob Soboroff promises will be a big guest, potentially Senator JD Vance himself coming out. Our senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson, joins the table. Hallie, we're just learning that former President Trump called JD Vance 20 minutes before he announced.
Are you surprised?
No, but it makes me feel better because Hallie and I were furiously working our sources trying to confirm it was him.
Let me tell you where you want to be on convention day. It's backstage with Welker and me. Okay. No, I mean, listen, this is very classic, I think, Donald Trump. And I think it is also why in public settings you had his senior aides, his staffers, when asked about his VP pick, saying, well, until he says it himself. Yes. And what did we learn in our years covering Donald Trump in the White House? He never wanted to get ahead of him because he could change his mind on a dime. And that's not just a cliche, or I guess it is. It's a cliche for a reason. It is because oftentimes some of the criticism leveled against him is that he went with the last voice in his ear. So you had a lot of people, and you well know this, at the White House jockeying to try to be that last voice in his ear. So it is not surprising to me that it went up to the wire. It is also not surprising to me that the announcement came from Donald Trump himself on Truth Social. Not a leak, right? I mean, there was widespread prediction that this was it. Once we even reported that it wasn't going to be Marco Rubio, that it wasn't going to be Doug Burgum. The only other person on the short list that I think had been a serious contender was, of course, Senator Vance. So all of it, I think, tracks with the way that the former president has also been teasing out this announcement for weeks. I mean, do you remember last week? I think it was 7 days ago now, when he was in Florida, home state, of course, of Senator Marco Rubio, going, well, I don't know. I mean, he really wanted to build up the drama here. And tonight, we now know who the pick is.
Yeah, and he did build up the drama. There's no doubt about that. Chuck, in addition to you and Mark and I were talking about his foreign policy views and how he does fit into Donald Trump's isolationist vision of the world. But when it comes to an issue like abortion, he was not where Trump was initially. In fact, he was supportive of a Texas law that does not include restrictions. And that's something that in these final days, his detractors have been trying to push push out to the media to say, hey, look, he's too far right when it comes to the issue of abortion.
By the way, his detractors, meaning people inside the Trump campaign who were advocating against him. I mean, that was what was remarkable about this, is that how many of the people worried about November were looking for reasons to persuade him against Vance. Those that are worried, are worried about 2028, they were fine with Vance. But it is fascinating to me that the most powerful arguments we were hearing against Vance were not coming from Democrats. It was coming from inside the House. But that was, that's the way Trump world operates, and Trump doesn't mind it. Like, we've all learned this. They will debate through leads. And you would see these debates, and then, the worst thing to happen to Doug Burgum is Rupert Murdoch came out for him. We know Trump hates that perception that somehow Fox in particular has some sort of influence. So that felt like a kiss of death. And then, look, I buy the idea because, it's my understanding, it was really Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita who were big Rubio advocates. And I think that there really was I think this constitutional issue was a real. How are you going to make Marco Rubio leave the state? Well, it was just an odd thing to do. So I buy that he might have been the actual person.
That was part of the reporting that I had from a source familiar with the conversations, and it was days of discussion. Could they get it worked out? Could they get the legalities done? And ultimately, the decision was they could try, and it might work. But in this instance,
I don't think Mark believes a lick of that.
Mark,
you don't believe a lick of it, do you?
No.
I know he does.
I think it's been Vance all along, but I also think that on Marco, the bigger issue is legally they could justify it. They're concerned with the Democrats have a reason not to certify the election. If Rubio is on the ticket, the Constitution says you can't have VP and Vice President from the same state.
It wouldn't create legal issues.
It would give them the concern. I don't think it was the legality. It was the politics of saying now Democrats will vote against certifying.
But Mark, politically speaking, to Chuck's point, some people inside the campaign, some Trump allies, were saying Rubio is the strongest pick electorally. He is an incredible fundraiser. He helps you energize key constituents. And that wasn't persuasive to Trump. As Chuck notes, this was not a political pick in JD Vance.
I agree with that. I think Marco, I said this on your show a few weeks ago, that I think Marco provided the most balance. He provided a lot more depth of what the options were. But I think that, again, where I think that this party is now going is a far more populist track, and that's what JD Vance measured. And only in a world where he probably was a Hillary Clinton voter in 2016 could he now be vice president for Donald Trump.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll pause it for just a moment. Chuck and Hallie, you are sticking around with me. Mark, thank you so much for being here. Coming up, we are just moments away from Senator JD Vance officially receiving the VP nomination. Florida Congressman Carlos Gimenez joins me on set next with his view of the ticket, his reaction in this historic race for president. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press Now, special coverage of the Republican National Convention. And welcome back. You are watching NBC News Now's special coverage of the first day of the 2024 Republican National Convention from Milwaukee. You're looking live as we get ready for the official announcement of Senator JD Vance as Donald Trump's running mate. Back with me now for more is Jacob Soboroff. He is on the convention floor waiting for Senator Vance to walk out. Set the scene, Jacob. Are we any closer to seeing him?
It feels that way, Kristen. I think in a previous life, I was an advanced person to former Mayor Mike Bloomberg in New York City. My job was to set up moments like this as candidates walked out or the mayor walked out himself. This is Advance 101. They've pushed everyone back. They've got security detail, both state, local. It appears to be federal. They're waiting in the corner. By all indications, this is where we believe JD Vance will walk out onto the floor to make his first appearance as the vice presidential running mate to former President Donald Trump. Let Chris Jackson give you a look at all the people here who are waiting to see JD Vance if and when he does walk out into this alleyway here and up towards the stage. I'm, in relation to where you are, I'm on the opposite side of the convention floor, almost all the way in the corner. There's an access way here. And so I think the idea would be when JD Vance walks through those doors right there, through the black scrim, he will, if he does indeed enter through that door, walk up this red carpet, down here to the left towards the Ohio delegation, where you can see the assembled crowd of not just reporters, but people from his delegation waiting for him. And then we'll see if he makes his way to the stage and if he addresses the assembled audience here, Kristen. It has to be only a matter of minutes at this point.
It has to be a matter of minutes, Jacob. You're right there in the middle of all of the action. I know when he walks out, you'll be ready with your questions, and we'll get right back to you, Jacob. Thanks so much for your reporting from the floor. Joining me now right here on set in Milwaukee is Florida Republican Congressman Carlos Gimenez. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So let me get your reaction to the news of the day, the fact that Donald Trump, the Republican nominee now officially, has chosen JD Vance to be his running mate. I know you were obviously pulling for Senator Marco Rubio. Yeah. We were just talking about why electorally he may have been an incredibly strong choice. What's your reaction? Are you disappointed?
No. I mean, look, I was pulling for Marco Rubio. I thought he would have been, a really great choice. But I also said we have a really deep bench, and that we're going to be we're going to be uniting. We're all united, around the president, and we're going to be uniting around this ticket. Now we know what the ticket's going to be, and we're going to go out and make sure that this ticket, President Trump and Vice President JD Vance, gets sworn in on January 2025.
Of course, we were just talking about the fact that critics of JD Vance inside the Republican Party were concerned that he wouldn't necessarily bolster the ticket, that he basically represents the future of the MAGA movement. He's obviously got a lot of support from Donald Trump Jr., for example, some other folks inside Donald Trump's orbit. But does he help expand the electoral map? Ohio would go for Trump, it would seem, regardless.
Well, he comes from the Midwest, and then we know that we need to make sure that we get states. Ohio is, I think, pretty much, what that we're going to be okay with. But Wisconsin, Michigan, et cetera, those are states that we need, for Donald Trump to win. And I think that JD Vance, gives us an opportunity in those states. He's the future of the party. He's a young guy. He's 40 years old. Veteran, Marine Corps corporal, but also pretty savvy. He's got a degree from Yale Law School, so he's a smart guy, an author, venture capitalist, and knows how to talk to young people. So yeah, I think he can expand the base in that way. And I look forward to working with him, and especially after he becomes vice president.
Let me ask you about that. Do you have any concerns that he's untested? As you say, he's young. He's only in his second year in the Senate. Is there a concern that if there is, for example, a crisis on the world stage, that he wouldn't have the foreign policy heft that a Marco Rubio, for example, would bring to the ticket?
But everybody brings different strengths to the ticket. So every one of these vice presidential candidates bring a different strength. He's going to be learning. It's an apprenticeship.
Yes,
right? Under
the ultimate
Trump.
apprenticeship.
Exactly. And so, I expect a 4-year apprenticeship. And then I believe he'll probably be, if Donald Trump becomes the president, which I believe he will be, he'll probably be the presumptive nominee, but he'll have 4 years under his belt. Under Donald Trump, and he'll continue that. We need to change the direction of this country, and not just in 4 years. It's going to take longer. People may disagree with me on that, but I am convinced that we need to change the direction of this country. Donald Trump will start that process, and JD Vance or somebody else will finish it, for President Trump.
Let me talk to you about the broader context in which we are sitting here. This comes, of course, just days after the assassination attempt against former President Trump. He has talked about the fact that he believes he was saved by God. I've been talking to folks who are close to him who say he is more contemplative now. He feels like he's gotten a second lease on life. He says he's overhauling his speech. How do you think the horrific events that unfolded in Pennsylvania will impact his speech and, quite frankly, this entire convention?
I think anytime you go through an experience like that, when you're that close to dying, I think that it has to change. It has to make you more spiritual. If he hadn't turned his head at the time. And so faith, intervention by God, the grace of God. By the grace of God, he is alive. And so that will, I think, I know him, not the politician. I've played some rounds of golf with him. He's a little bit different than what a lot of people portray him to be. And so what I think, look, here's what I think. America is facing some great challenges, not only internally, but also around the world. And the only way that America is going to survive and overcome those challenges is united. So I would expect that you're going to see a message of unity coming from our nominee. And I expect that there will be a change, a little bit, some change in his message. And I think it'll be one of unity. We have to come together. America is stronger when we're together. And believe me, America needs to be strong because we are facing some great challenges.
You have been critical of former President Trump, some of his rhetoric in the past when you have felt it has not been a unifying message. Do you think beyond this week we will see him modify his message, his tone?
Again, I think that this incident has to have had some kind of an impact on him. Look, what I've said is I may not agree with some things he said. I do agree with a lot, but I do believe what he does, okay? I believe in his policies, and that's what's more important to me than anything else. On the other hand, you know, President Biden might say the right thing, but I disagree vehemently with what he does. And so for me, it's more important what you do, not what you say. And President Trump has proven time and time again what he does is right for this country.
And of course, there is a debate inside the Democratic Party about whether President Biden should stay at the top of the ticket. Now, to some extent, that debate has been stalled in the wake of the horrific events in Pennsylvania. It's not clear how much momentum it will continue to have moving forward. But is there a concern inside the Republican Party about what might happen if he does pass the torch to a Vice President Kamala Harris or someone else inside the party?
Well, if he decides that he's not capable of being the nominee, and he's probably not capable of being the president, right? So if he passes that torch, then that's a process. But if it's somehow a revolution inside the Democrat Party, that somehow they're going to overthrow Joe Biden, isn't that the party that says that we're somehow a threat to democracy? Wasn't he democratically elected as your nominee? And so, yeah, it's kind of hypocritical, I think. And so until Joe Biden decides that he no longer wants to be the candidate, the nominee, I think the Democrats need to follow the will of their voters, and he's the nominee. Now, if he decides that he's not capable of it, he probably needs to pass that on to Kamala Harris as the vice president, and then she becomes the presumptive nominee.
All right. Congressman Gimenez, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's great to be with you. Really appreciate your perspective today. And we will be right back after a quick break. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. And welcome back. You are watching special coverage of the Republican National Convention from Milwaukee right here on NBC News Now. We want to get back to the action, and Jacob Soboroff, who is on the convention floor. And Jacob, as we are having this conversation, the headline here is that former President Donald Trump has officially been nominated to be his party's nominee, and he announced Senator JD Vance as his running mate from the great state of Ohio. And you are there waiting for JD Vance to walk out. Any word on when he's coming out?
Kristen, I'm sorry that we're still looking at a door, but looking at a door has never been so exciting. What you're looking at right now is the staging area from the senator from the great state of Ohio, JD Vance, to emerge and either walk to the Ohio delegation or take the stage as the official pick as the vice presidential running mate, the nominee to run with former President Donald Trump to become potentially the next president and vice president of the United States. Of course, they are very aligned on issues related to the economy. Donald Trump has spent a considerable amount of time in the Rust Belt. JD Vance talks a lot about the decimated manufacturing industry where he comes from in Ohio. We've all spent a lot of time there, and obviously that is going to be very central to the economic message of this campaign. We'll get a better idea when JD Vance emerges from behind the black drapery over there, if indeed that's where he's coming from. And let me give you one more look as a reset here of what we expect JD Vance to do when he enters through those doors in a matter of moments. He'll come through here and he'll either walk up in this area here through this overhang, or he'll come right by us and walk up towards the Ohio delegation. You can see the stage in the distance. Look, it looks like a little commotion here. Let's see if we can get. See, we're watching advanced people do their jobs. Doesn't seem like anything yet, Kristen, but we will continue to keep an eye on this very closely, and we will do our best to pull over the senator from the great state of Ohio when he walks out to accept that nomination as soon as we lay eyes on him.
All right, and Jacob, we will come back to you as soon as you give us the high sign that you see any action there at that door. Thank you so much, Jacob. Well, as this Republican National Convention kicks off here in Milwaukee, Donald Trump has scored a major legal victory in Florida, where a judge dismissed the classified documents case against the former president. In a 93-page decision, Judge Aileen Cannon, who was appointed by Donald Trump, ruled that the appointment of special counsel Jack Smith, who brought the case, was unconstitutional. Now, Cannon argues that Smith had not been appointed by the president or confirmed by the Senate. NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian joins me. Also with me is Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. attorney, former senior FBI official, and current NBC News legal analyst. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. Ken, let me start with you. What is the Justice Department's likely next step? Are we anticipating that it will appeal this ruling?
That's what we think will happen, Kristen. It's interesting. I've been waiting for a few hours for the Justice Department to issue a statement in reaction to this, and they have not done so yet. I know that lawyers are cloistered behind closed doors working on how they are going to react to this. But I also know they profoundly disagree with this ruling, which goes against 25 years of tradition of using the special counsel regulation to appoint special counsels, and goes against 4 or 5 other federal judges that have heard similar arguments and ruled in the exact opposite direction, including a Trump-appointed judge in Washington, D.C., when Robert Mueller's appointment was challenged on these same grounds. Because the logic of this decision would say that Robert Mueller was also improperly appointed as a special counsel because he wasn't appointed by the president or confirmed by the Senate either. So this is a highly technical argument. You know, it's a 92-page decision. Judge Cannon cites a lot of case law. It's not entirely implausible, but it's just very strange that she's the only judge in 25 years to come out this way. And it's dismissing the entire case. It's totally gone. All the hearings are canceled. The motions are moot. And so now the Justice Department has to decide whether they appeal, or they have other options, too. They could refile the case with the U.S. attorney in Miami, but we'll have to wait and see what they do.
We will. Do you anticipate it'll go to the Supreme Court, Ken?
Yes, because however the 11th Circuit rules, whether they overturn Judge Cannon or uphold her, the losing side is likely to appeal. This is a significant issue that goes beyond this case because this is the way that we appoint special counsels in this country after the independent counsel law lapsed in 1999. And without this regulation, the Justice Department would be unable to appoint special counsels unless Congress passes a law. And, you know, Merrick Garland and other attorney generals have found the need to do that. So it's a larger issue than just this one case.
Chuck, let me go to you. Can you put this into a broader context? Because legal analysts were saying that they were quite surprised that Judge Cannon took this step. Why is this outside of what folks were anticipating?
Sure, Kristen. Well, as Ken so ably described, this issue has been raised multiple times over the past several decades, and each and every time the special counsel regulations were found to be valid. The appointment of a special counsel was found to be lawful, proper, and constitutional. So in a broader context, Judge Cannon is on a bit of a legal island by herself. It doesn't mean she's wrong, although I think she is, respectfully. And it doesn't necessarily tell you what the 11th Circuit, the Court of Appeals, that sits over her will do. And it certainly doesn't tell you what the Supreme Court will do. By the way, I think Ken is quite right that the case will go to the Supreme Court with one caveat. That is, if the case still exists. If Mr. Trump is elected again as president, it's entirely possible, plausible, perhaps even likely, that he will dismiss the case. And if the case is dismissed and there is nothing pending for either the 11th Circuit or the Supreme Court to decide.
Chuck, what might this mean for the other cases pending against former President Trump. Obviously, there's the election interference case. There's the case in Georgia that was brought in a different matter. But what might this mean for the other case that was brought by Jack Smith?
Yeah, so if it means anything for any case, it's only the one that Jack Smith brought in a different jurisdiction in the District of Columbia. But, Kristen, I don't think it means anything for that case, and here's why. Number one, it's been challenged in D.C. in various cases, and the D.C. courts, including the D.C. Court of Appeals, has found that the appointment of special counsel, these regulations are constitutional. Moreover, a federal judge sitting in Florida has absolutely no authority over a federal judge sitting anywhere else in the United States. She's not an appellate court. She's certainly not the Supreme Court. She's just a trial judge, a federal trial judge, but just a trial judge in a completely different district. So I don't think it has any precedential value. Does it have any persuasive value? I think not. Again, the D.C. federal courts have already ruled on this issue, and their rulings are all contrary to what Judge Cannon just did.
You are watching Senator JD Vance walk out onto the convention floor, holding his wife's hand. He has just been named as Donald Trump's running mate. 39 years old, senator from the great state of Ohio, author of Hillbilly Elegy, someone who was once one of Donald Trump's fiercest critics, now one of his biggest supporters, biggest defenders, poised to accept his party's nomination to be Donald Trump's vice presidential nominee. You can see the excitement, the frankly enthusiasm in the room is palpable. Let's go back to Jacob Soboroff. Jacob, what was it like as he walked out, as we watched these pictures unfold?
You said,
he's there.
Kristen, you said it.
everyone.
There is excitement and there is enthusiasm. You saw him walk out with his wife, and to me, honestly, the striking part of this was I've never seen JD Vance in person. At least I can't recall a moment that I have. He has a youthful look and a youthful energy to him. And I know we'll get into policy. We'll get into the politics of this moment in just a little bit. But it's a different look. It's a younger look. And when you will ultimately see Vice President Kamala Harris go up against JD Vance, that is the next generation of American politics. And with this decision, former President Trump has chosen someone of our generation, a millennial, someone who was born in the 1980s at the latest. At the latest. And so JD Vance is now out there on the convention floor, and all I can see is people wanting to grab him, do selfies with him. Like I said, he's from the Rust Belt. He's from the heartland of America. We'll be talking a lot more about that in the manufacturing issues, immigration, everything that he said about the shooting with former President Trump and the way that he assigns blame. But now's the moment for him to walk out here and be in the spotlight for the first time as former President Trump's selection to become his vice presidential running mate, Kristen.
Well, it is an historic moment as we watch JD Vance shake hands, hug, high five the delegates, holding his wife's hand there on the convention floor. As we watch this scene unfold, I want to go to Scott Walker, former governor of Wisconsin. Governor, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Good to be here. Exciting night.
It's exciting. I know a lot has happened today. Let's talk about what's happened today. Donald Trump is now your party's official nominee to be president of the United States, and he announced his running mate in a Truth Social post. And
classic Trump, right?
Classic Trump, just about 20 minutes after he called JD Vance and made him know it was official. What's your reaction to this pick?
I think it's exciting. Obviously, as a Midwesterner, we're here in my home area, on home turf, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We couldn't be more thrilled to have a Midwesterner in the ticket. But I think more than that, you even hear it with the music, you think about that book that he wrote about his family's life. I think a lot of Americans who don't know much about him will be amazed to think this is someone whose family dealt with addiction. This is someone who lived in the depth of poverty and despair. And a lot of Americans feel abandoned by politicians of both parties in Washington. This pick, I think the more they get to know about JD Vance, will appeal to them.
What do you let me follow up with you on that point on the politics of this pick, because he's widely seen as the future of the MAGA movement. A Trump campaign official once explained the different choices Trump was mulling as JD Vance is the future. Senator Marco Rubio would have potentially helped electorally quite a bit. And North Dakota Governor North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum was seen as a safe pick, someone who would never upstage Trump. This is a 39-year-old senator in his second year of serving in the U.S. Senate. Do you think he helps politically?
Yeah, I think, again, for those two reasons. Midwest, battleground states, Michigan, Wisconsin, key states. Obviously, Ohio, I think, is going to be in the bag already, but even more so now. But I think more important than that, it's a generational pick. It's saying with all the talk about age and questioning that going forward, this is somebody who's that next generation, but not just some young rising star. As he mentioned in his book, this is someone who suffered through a lot. His family suffered through a lot. I think that, for America lost 100,000 people to overdoses last year. When people hear that this is someone who doesn't just talk about it, he has lived it, he can appeal, he can connect with those voters, that's really powerful.
The Biden campaign has already indicated, according to our team of reporters at the White House, that they are going to define JD Vance as being extreme. They will argue he is extreme on abortion, for example. He made comments in the wake of the Texas law. The abortion ban being passed does not include exceptions. He downplayed the fact that it doesn't include exceptions. That's outside of where Trump is. Trump is very much someone who says that exceptions are key and this should be left up to the states. He's espoused that position. He's now closer to Trump. But what do you make of that? Could that be a drag on the
Donald Trump is the nominee of this party. It's his agenda going forward, win or lose. And I think that's clear. Just like Kamala Harris, Newsweek identified her 4 years ago as to the left of Bernie Sanders in terms of being liberal on the issues. So both of these candidates, Kamala Harris and JD Vance, are both the nominees going forward of their respective presidential nominee. They'll adopt the policies that Biden and Trump have.
Governor, let's talk about this moment in which we find ourselves, because there's a lot of excitement right now on the convention floor, understandably, and yet it comes at a somber moment, not only for your party, but for this country, quite frankly, in the wake of the assassination attempt against former President Trump. How do you think that will impact the proceedings here?
It's really overwhelming. It's changed everything from the moment delegates started to come in yesterday as we welcomed to Wisconsin. Obviously, a sense of grace and appreciation that by God's grace, the former president, and I say that not just because he's my nominee, but I was upset years ago when someone got through the North Lawn at the White House when Barack Obama was president. We don't want that of any American president or former president. But I think here it's a renewed sense of focus. I still remember as a kid when Ronald Reagan was shot and how that made me feel, how scared America was, and then how strong he was after that. That was part of his divine plan to move the country and the world forward. I'm hopeful that we'll hear about that in the coming days from President Trump.
It's our reporting that the former president is rewriting his speech. He said that. He has said that he feels as though he was saved by God. I've spoken to people who have been in touch with him who say he seems more contemplative. What do you expect we'll hear from his speech now, Governor?
I think he'll talk about unity, but not just bland comments about that, but I think about what it meant to him. I hope he shares personally what it was like with that literally near-death experience. I think it probably had an impact on this VP pick in the sense that he thought, well, it's time to set up the next generation. I'm not going to be around. My generation's not going to be around. We want to set a vice president who's going to be someone who can carry the torch forward, at least in the next 4 years, if not beyond that. So I think it's very contemplative, but I also think he's not going to back away from being a fighter. We saw it on that stage Saturday night. The key is, for winning in Wisconsin and elsewhere, he's got to be a fighter for everyday Americans, for the people who feel forgotten, and that's what he won with in 16, and I think he's capable of doing it again now.
Governor Scott Walker, thank you so much for being here. We're going to go back to the convention floor. They're about to officially nominate Senator JD Vance as the vice presidential nominee to Donald J. Trump.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.